The 1985 Bears, the 1986 Giants, the 2000 Ravens, the 2002 Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But one defense that normally doesn't get mentioned with those teams, the 1991 Gangrene Eagles defense. And that one was the one that was most dominant by Football Outsiders over the last 30 years. Brendan Albert and Philly.500 are both here. We're going to have a handicap match tonight. We got Philly.500 and Adrian from the Bitter Birds ganging up on Brendan, who will be defending the 2000 Ravens. So obviously, as an Eagles fan, I am going to be biased in this show. I am going to defend the 1991 Eagles defense. So let's bring the guys onto the show. How you guys doing?
Good. How you doing? Thank you for having us.
Adrian, we're excited about it, my man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so I wanted to start with Philly.500, and I wanted to start with the 1991 Eagles defense and just kind of give you an overview of kind of what was going on with the franchise at that point. So this was the first year that Rich Kotite was the head coach. Buddy Ryan was, he's gone. And you had a mixture, basically, of Buddy Ryan's defense and the philosophy of Bud Carson, who came there to be the defensive coordinator first year of Rich Kotite. Carson, obviously, we know him from the Steeler Curtain fame. So Philly.500, tell us about that team and tell us about what was going on at that time.
Well, that team was primed for a Super Bowl run. I mean, that was the year we were supposed to go. Cunningham was supposed to have a huge year. The defense definitely was solid across the board. I mean, you had almost Pro Bowlers almost everywhere. I mean, and then, first game of the year, you go out, Cunningham blows out his knee against Green Bay, staying in the pocket, of course, because that's what Rich Kotite wanted him to do. And, the next thing you know, he's out for the year. McMahon comes in. McMahon gets hurt. Then you have guys like Brad Gable, Pat Ryan, Jeff Kemp. And this was an offense with no offensive line. I mean, had no offensive line, no running back to speak of. Yet the defense still got them to a 10-6 record in a division where you had one of the greatest teams of all time, the Washington Redskins, with that Hall of Fame offensive line. And then you had, an up-and-coming dynasty in Dallas, who I believe went 11-5 that year. And then you had the Giants, who were still a formidable team at that time. So it was a really tough division, tough conference, and they still managed to go 10-6 on the backs of the defense. It was one of the most dominating defenses I've ever seen.
Now we move on to the 2000 Ravens. This is where we get Brendan into the fold. So 4 years after they move from Cleveland to Baltimore, they never go more than 8-8 until the 2000 season, where they go 12-4. Defense runs rampant. They win a Super Bowl. They beat up on the Giants in Super Bowl 35. So, Brendan, now you get your turn. And just kind of like what Philly.500 did, just kind of a brief background of what the Ravens were going through at that time.
Yeah, well, let's put it this way. They won a Super Bowl, so, with just the defense, okay? So let's just kind of dignify this. We all talk about success and every asset we do by championships. That's just the way we as fans consume our sport. And the Ravens won a Super Bowl, okay, largely based on their defense. I mean, their defense. I'm not going to knock what the Eagles did, because honestly, I think what the Ravens did are they're in the front lane. In my opinion, the Eagles are chasing them here. I know all the viewers here are going to boo me and hate me, but you know what? I don't care. We got a ring. We can shine it. There's a reason that we're the greatest defense of all time. But when we're looking here at the Baltimore Ravens defense, they're going to go down with having 2 Hall of Famers, which is pretty impressive. Not many teams have that. But realistically, there's only one Hall of Famer on that team at that time. Rod Woodson was 35 years old. He was barely playing at elite level at that point. It was really just Ray and a bunch of really good players at the time. But, I mean, look, they ran through the month of October without scoring an offensive touchdown and were still be able to make it into the playoffs and then win a Super Bowl. That's pretty freaking impressive. We'll talk more about details, but to me, there's no question the 2000 Ravens defense is the greatest of all time.
All right, now we'll kind of break this discussion up into what games kind of impressed us. And the reason why I bring this up, I just got done watching the 1991 game against the Cowboys where the Eagles had 11 sacks on freaking believable going against that Dallas offensive line. So Philly.500 and I will talk about the Eagles briefly, and then we'll let Brendan kind of go a little bit further in a couple of games that he wants to get into. So 2 games to highlight: the House of Pain game between the Oilers and Eagles, and then you got the one against Dallas. I was unable to find the House of Pain game, so I wasn't able to watch it, but I do know that they won the game, and it was the only time that the Oilers did not score an offensive touchdown all season long. But the Dallas game, the one that I actually watched, unfreaking believable. This was a Dallas offensive line, remember, one of the greatest offensive lines of all time. Now, it didn't have Eric Williams yet, so Leon Lett was playing the right tackle position, but Reggie White was making mincemeat of Leon Lett. The bull rush was unbelievable, and Clyde Simmons has 4 sacks in this game, and basically on every play, the Eagles' defensive line was in the backfield.
Yeah, and don't forget, Jerome had like 2 or 3, and he was just coming off of a holdout. So he hadn't even been in training camp the whole entire time. Pretty much comes in. I think he had 2 sacks the week before. He had 2 sacks, from a defensive tackle that gets you double-digit sacks a year. I mean, that's pretty impressive. And then, Reggie could be put anywhere, over the middle, on the outside, any spot. Reggie's a 300-pound defensive end. I mean, how many defensive ends do we have at 300 pounds with his speed? He could still play today. You know what I mean? Then you have Seth Joyner shutting down Novacek that game too. I mean, he could cover the tight ends. We can't cover tight ends now, but just think about it. I mean, I think Clyde Simmons had 4 sacks that game, right? Now, what would I be if I didn't take a shot at Brandon Graham? 5.5 sacks all year. Clyde Simmons gets almost over half of that in one game with 4. And I'm supposed to say Brandon Graham something? Come on. Dominating defense. It was a dominating defense. There's no ands, if, but. And as far as the Houston game, the one thing I will say about his Baltimore team, and I'll say about the Eagles that year and the 85 Bears, is those were 3 defenses that I remember that scared opposing offenses. They intimidated you. There's a lot of defenses today that don't intimidate, and that Houston game, after the Wes Hopkins hit, I forget which receiver, but he hit him over the middle, broke his nose.
Oh yeah, I saw that. But
the rest of that game,
that would have been a 15-yard penalty if they were playing it today.
I don't know.
You hit him right in the face.
But they were scared after that, and that's what kind of defense they had. They intimidated you, And there's only 3 defenses that I've seen in my lifetime that really have done that. 85 Bears, Ravens, and Eagles.
All right, so just real quick before I get to Brendan. So to name that Dallas offensive line, it basically had everyone there. Mark Tude was their left tackle. Kevin Gogan was their left guard. Center was Mark Stepnoski, and then right guard John Gisak, and then right tackle Nate Newton. So they basically had everybody intact. And that Eagles defensive line was freaking unbelievable. And the other thing was, when Troy actually had the time to throw, he would basically just, loft it up in the air. And that's why they also had all those interceptions in that game as well, if you remember. So
I think –
yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I was going to say, I think at halftime he had 22 yards passing, and Emmitt Smith had 2 yards rushing.
Yeah, Emmitt Smith couldn't do anything.
Yeah.
Their first, positive play downfield was midway through the second quarter, I'm seeing. So Dallas didn't do anything. All right, let's go to Brendan.
All right,
how we do that year?
Let's go back to talking about the number 1 defense again. Let's kind of ring back in.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna read off 3 games for you. Okay, September 24th, we played the Bengals. Bengals obviously weren't super. The Ravens beat them 37-0. Okay, they allowed 7 first downs in a game for a total of 93 yards. 93 yards in an NFL game was a total, and they had 4 turnovers. Okay, let's go down to the December 10th. This was right before playoff start. They won a game 24-3 against the Chargers. 9 first downs, 128 total yards, 5 interceptions, or 5 turnovers, excuse me. Then we get the Super Bowl. Again, the Super Bowl's kind of the game that's important. Just want to remind everybody.
It's not a big deal at all, actually.
No, it's kind of important. Okay, they Super Super Bowl.
It's like a preseason game.
Yeah, exactly. They won the Super Bowl 34-7, let up 11 first downs, 152 yards, and five turnovers. Okay, now here's the thing. I live out here in Vegas. Randall Cunningham lives right down the street and coaches at the high school right down the street from me. So I know Randall, okay, and I know how great that Eagles team would have been if Randall would have been healthy, no doubt about it. However, the Ravens played 2 quarterbacks all season. Both of them were garbage, okay? So bad that the Ravens are the only Super Bowl winning team ever to win the Super Bowl and then release the starting quarterback of that Super Bowl the next offseason. That's unbelievable. I mean, that just doesn't happen in the modern era. I mean, what the Ravens were doing is just unreal with everything they had on that defense.
So I'll just say that Dallas game, they held Dallas to 90 yards overall.
And let me say this real quick because I gotta interject here. Now the Ravens, they beat up on Cincinnati, they beat up on Cleveland, they beat up on Pittsburgh. Those teams weren't that good back then. That year they stunk. But the Eagles had to go up against one of the greatest teams in the Washington Redskins. I believe this team had allowed 9 sacks all year, NFL record. 5 of those sacks came against the Eagles. So if the Eagles had an easier way to the playoffs, then maybe we would have gotten there too. But going through 2 quarterbacks ain't a lot. We went through like 5 stinky quarterbacks, like literally, like nobody ever heard of these guys. You know what I mean? It was bad. Now, I respect the Ravens, I do, but sometimes.
Hey, no doubt. I'm not arguing. Now, I think we all have to kind of sit here and admit the game is completely different from 2000 it was in 1991. I mean, it's the offensive systems, the game's rules have completely changed to favor, the offense. And unfortunately, I don't think we're ever going to see a defense in our modern era as good as either of these teams, just because the way the rules change, right? I mean, the way that we're seeing the wide open passing game, you're never going to see that. I hear your point. Now, let me kind of just remind everybody here. The Ravens this time were in the same division as the Tennessee Titans. The Titans actually won that division, going 13-3 with the late Steve McNair and Eddie George, 2 Hall of Famers on their offense, and they were a formidable team going to the Super Bowl right that next year too. So it's not like the Ravens beat, a whole bunch of nobodies. They also beat Peyton Manning. He turned out to have a pretty good career. Sure, he was young at the time, but he did okay. I mean, they're not exactly beating nobodies here, but you're not wrong. I mean, the NFL was certainly nowhere near offensively gifted as it is in 2009 than it was in 2000 than it was in 1991.
Well, all right. So I guess since we're kind of in the debating stage now, my one big argument for this was going to be, say this. So at that time, the NFL was kind of going through its transition. Not a lot of great offenses at the time. This is kind of where we had John Elway retire, and we saw transition. We're about to see this transition in a couple years. And Brendan, this was a point you made last week on a show that we did about, don't be surprised if you see defenses kind of take over. It's not really because of the defenses, it's because the offenses have gotten worse. So this is a time when you had a lot of parity in the league and basically a lot of no-name quarterbacks. So let me read off some of the quarterbacks that the Ravens faced that year. Some busts, by the way. Ryan Leaf, Achilles Smith, Tim Couch, Kent Graham of the Steelers, if no one knows who that is. I barely know who the hell that is. Doug Peterson, Spurgeon Wynn, Jay Fiedler, Scott Mitchell, Jake Plummer, and who the hell is this? Jamie Martin. That's not good. So those are just some names, but in defense of the Ravens, again, I mean, obviously, fewest points allowed in the season at 165, fewest rushing yards allowed in the season at 970. So I'll start with the quarterbacks. They didn't play anybody. So that's like the argument. But although when you look at the running backs, they did play some running backs. Eddie George, you brought up the Titans. They played Curtis Martin, Corey Dillon, Emmitt Smith, Fred Taylor, Jerome Bettis, Stephen Davis. So there you go. So if they're allowing the fewest rushing yards in a season with 970 and they played all those backs, that's pretty damn impressive.
Tiki Barber in the Super Bowl.
There you go, Tiki Barber. Yeah, I guess that wasn't a regular season guy. So I was just kind of going down. But quarterbacks, they didn't play anybody. Running backs, they did. But, you know, that's kind of the argument here. At the time, offenses weren't great. And, so that's really the one argument I can make.
I won't argue with that at all. But here's what I'll say. When the Ravens did play them, they whipped that ass of every single team.
They did.
They handled, doesn't matter. If you step between the lines, the Ravens were going to bring it. And it didn't matter if you were Peyton Manning or if you were Gus Frerotte. They were going to bring the A game, and they did. Now, here's the other thing we got to remember. In 1991, the offensive average points per total season was 303. In 2000, it was 330. So, yes, there was certainly not as good of quarterbacks. I hear that. But in the end of the day, the points on the board matter. It doesn't say, you know, on the scoreboard, Peyton Manning scored 16 points, so you're going to win because you have Peyton Manning. No, it matters who scored the most points. We're seeing more points scored in 2000 than we are in 1991. But honestly, that's not really a fair thing to say because we're going to see more points scored today than we would see in 2000. It's just the offensive changing. But if we're going to slight the quarterbacks, that's fine. But let's also acknowledge the fact that they were scoring more points in 2000 than they were in 1991.
Yeah. Philly.500, you got anything?
Well, I would say this, and we also need to remember that free agency hadn't really started yet.
Very true.
And so teams were a lot better overall. They're the better team. You know what I mean? Now it's so much more watered down as far as teams go. So some of those teams, like I always think of that Redskins, and that was a good team. A lot of Hall of Famers on there. Then you had the Dallas build their team. So there was a lot of really tough teams, and you can't forget the Niners.
They went 10-6 and didn't make the playoffs.
They went 10-6, didn't make the playoffs. So
neither did the Eagles at 10-6.
Yeah, both of them were not. Yeah, that's right. And I think they added a wild card team later. So, just to keep in mind that too, it's a little more watered down now with free agency, but not so much. In 2000, I would complain about that more today with the Broncos and the Seahawks and those teams.
Yeah, I'm looking at the standings right now. So actually, they did have. I think the wild card might have started in 1990, the second one, I believe. So this was the second year maybe they had the extra wild card. But look at the freaking teams in this conference. Washington at 14-2, a point differential of plus 261. San Francisco went 10-6 plus point differential plus 154. They did not make the postseason. Saints went 11-5. Detroit went 12-4. You had Dallas 11-5. Chicago went 11-5. Wow. NFC was really, really good that year.
Here, it looks like in 1990, 2 more wild card teams were added. So it looks like 90 was when they started that.
Yeah, and they always had just the one wild card game from each conference before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was tough. Those were tough teams,
Yeah. All right, so the other argument you can make for the Eagles is, Philly.500, I'll let you make that argument, is the offense and just how bad it was. Now, I know you referenced it before, but so this is where we could say, okay, well, the Ravens, they didn't have a quarterback either, but at least they had Jamal Lewis, and they had a great offensive line. You had Jonathan Ogden. So they had that. Eagles had nothing working for them.
No, they were total shambles. I mean, I believe the running backs were Keith Byers, who wasn't really a good running back. He was better receiver out of the backfield. You did have Keith Jackson, and some of the receivers were okay, but you had no quarterback to get him the ball. And then I believe Heath Sherman was pretty much the primary running back then. And you probably don't even remember Heath Sherman. So the running backs was weak. And then the offensive line was really weak. And that's why your quarterbacks took such a beating. And that's why they went through so many. So McMahon, when he goes down, I believe, I think it was Brad Gable came in, he gets hurt. Then they had to go out and sign Pat Ryan. Then he gets hurt. And then in that House of Pain game, they had to go to Jeff Kemp, who I think played a couple games. I mean, So that defense was, I mean, a lot of games, that defense was on the field a long time, or what seemed like the whole game. You know what I mean? And I would be curious to know how many offensive, how many turnovers were scored for touchdowns against the Eagles, because I don't remember that defense giving up a lot of points.
Yeah, and it's when you look at the points per game allowed, the Eagles were actually 5th that season, but opponents were always on the field because they always had the ball. The Eagles' offense was never on the field, so that points per game allowed stat was actually kind of overrated. More than overrated. I'm trying to look to see what the time of possession was in 1991. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find that, but Brendan, talk about that 2000 offense.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, yeah, they had Jamal Lewis. They also had an older Priest Holmes at the time, and eventually Jamal Lewis ran him out of town, and then Priest ended up having a very successful, obviously, career with the Chiefs. But that Ravens offense, they only had one Pro Bowler on that entire offense, and that was Jonathan Ogden, their left tackle, who's going to go down as probably one of the best left tackles of all time, probably the second best pick ever by the Baltimore Ravens, behind Ray Lewis, of course. But that year that they were doing what they were doing offensively, it was nothing around them. I mean, Brandon Stokely was their number one receiver. They had an aging Shannon Sharp, who they had for a year, who he made a couple plays in the offense, sure, but no one's going to say that Shannon Sharp was a Pro Bowl or even top-end offensive talent there. Jamal Lewis was certainly their bell cow. I mean, there's no doubt that Jamal Lewis did what he needed to, and he was a nice compliment. He didn't turn the ball over, and he was able to stay between the tackles, but it's not like exactly he was ripping through the NFL either. I mean, if he was, he would have been a Pro Bowler, especially because this is back in the times when the Pro Bowl was several weeks after the Super Bowl, so all these players were still going to the Pro Bowl at this time, and the Ravens just didn't have any offensive threats that were Pro Bowl eligible, so it's hard to say they really were a good offensive player anywhere except for at left tackle.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not making the argument that it's a great offense or good offense or anything like that. Definitely mediocre at best. But at least they did have that running game a little bit. They were able to control the clock at least. And, that's kind of the argument there. But, other than that, I mean, offense not too much different.
Didn't they score a lot of special teams touchdowns too? I thought they had.
Did.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had Rocket Ishmael. There's a name.
Right. Yeah, as a returner. Yeah.
Had Rocket, but I mean, they scored a ton on defense. I mean, they scored. Yeah. They would win games by scoring defensive touchdowns in the months.
That's how they won the playoffs. Yeah, because I remember the Titans game was a great game. It was 10-10, and then didn't they have 2 runbacks or something?
Yeah, Ray Lewis. Well, ultimately, the final score was 24-10. So and they did have one defensive touchdown, but it was the interception from Ray Lewis. And even when you go back and you watch that clip, it's a McNair throw to the flat on the right to Eddie George just releasing. Eddie George heard footsteps. I mean, when you watch that clip, Eddie George turns, and then that allows Ray to take it. That game, Eddie George wanted no more parts of Ray Lewis.
Well, that's what they said about Eddie George back then, was that he hated playing the Ravens. He hated getting hit by them.
And 500, you mentioned it earlier, defenses that intimidate. I mean, Eddie George is probably going to go down as one of the hardest runners of all time. I think we all can agree with that. But he ran scared. I mean, he straight up ran scared when he had to play the Ravens. And if you want to talk about greatness of a defense, this guy was a Heisman Trophy candidate from Ohio State. It's not like he didn't play big competition his whole life. And then he went between the lines of Ray, and he wanted no part of him.
Yeah,
go ahead.
No, I was going to say that was a very impressive defense, especially that Tennessee game. I'll never forget that game. I mean, they were very dominating, and they reminded me of that 91 Eagles. I remember saying it to people at the time. They remind me of that. They had that dog in them. You know what I mean? They had that, and that's why they're special. I mean, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, and they went back to back. That the next week they went and played the Raiders, who the Raiders were the 1 seed. They won 16-3, and the Raiders at the time were the rushing leaders of the NFL. They held them to 24 yards in the AFC Championship game.
Yeah.
I mean, Like that literally means they didn't allow more than two 10-yard runs. I mean, they just absolutely destroyed. That was the best offensive line in the NFL at the time.
And obviously, the Raiders also had Rich Gannon at the time. So, obviously won an MVP 2002, along with Steve McNair. So, they went through both those. Yeah, that playoff run was absolutely impressive. I mean, even going back to the wild card game, they beat the Broncos 21-3. So, might have been the most impressive defensive playoff run of all time. That definitely can't say that about the Eagles.
No, it is. It is absolutely. I think it's the most impressive. I mean, because that was. I mean, I always say that they had the worst quarterback ever to win a Super Bowl was that Baltimore Ravens team. You know, there's no doubt about it.
Mm-hmm. And this is what always makes me laugh. Whenever I have like some of my buddies who like will say, "Well, greatness is if you win the Super Bowl." Okay, so then by that theory, Trent Dilfer is better than Dan Marino.
Yeah.
Like that's why do we all as fans we all want to measure success by Super Bowls. I get it, but sometimes we got to call spade a spade. You know, that doesn't always mean the best team's going to win. It doesn't mean the best player is going to win. Now, in the Eagles' defense, I will say this: when you actually look at that 1991 defense versus the Ravens defense only had 3 Pro Bowlers. The Eagles actually had 4, between Jerome Back, Eric Allen, Reggie White, and Clyde Simpson. So for them that year, I would say they actually had a better talent, but the Ravens, what they did was a better team at that time.
That Joyner too.
They had 3 all first team all pro, right? I think.
Yep.
White. I think they had 5 starters in the Pro Bowl.
Clyde Simpson was an All-Pro. Reggie White was an All-Pro, and of course Jerome was an All-Pro too.
Clyde had like 13 sacks. Reggie had like 15 sacks. Jerome had like 9.5 sacks. I mean, that was a nasty line.
What I love about the Dallas game, go back to that again, is like Reggie White. I believe he only had like 1 sack in the game, but he kept setting up the sacks for everybody because he would collapse the pocket. Troy Aikman would have to step up, and then there's Jerome Brown to finish it off. There was Clyde Simmons to finish it off. That's why he had 4 sacks in that game. So, Reggie White, the stat I had, when I was watching that game with Dallas, they had the most sacks since 1985, and they listed the leaders. Reggie White was number 1 with 98. Lawrence Taylor was number 2, 87.5. And I think that says Bruce Smith at 76.5. So you can see Reggie White was just like so much further ahead of the competition.
And Clyde Simmons, you know, he wound up being, like a 19 sack guy himself for many years. I mean, I think he's second on the Eagles all time. Maybe Trent Cole is now, but Simmons would get 19 sacks, 16 sacks on the opposite end of Reggie.
Yeah.
You know.
Oh, I forgot to read off some nuggets. So more nuggets that go against the Ravens' schedule. Brendan's gonna love this. So 7 of the 11 teams that they played in 2000, 8-8 or worse records. You look at I mean, again, like I know you made the argument. Well, you know they beat up on these teams that's on your schedule, whatever, blah blah blah. But San Diego 1-15, Cleveland 3-13, Cincinnati 4-12, and they got to play Cincinnati and Cleveland twice. Hey,
the hate is lovely when you're sitting at the top, looking down at you guys.
Oh, just you're lucky.
But here's the
hey, you live down the street from Randall Cunningham. He'll tell you that team would have won the Super Bowl.
That's fair, but what if, could have, and should have? All right. I mean, I don't know what else you want to say. I mean, look, I hear you, but you can't fault the Ravens defense for who they scheduled. Again, you play us, okay, we're gonna whip your ass. That's why they set all these NFL records. Now, again, yeah, I understand that maybe they're not as good offensively as other teams, or maybe it wasn't the great year. The NFL average was scoring more points in 2000 than it was in 1991, and yet the Ravens still set the all-time leading record for the fewest points scored. I mean, if I'm going to flip it on it, the Eagles didn't even lead their own division in the fewest points scored that year. It was the Redskins. So, I mean, I'm not knocking what the Eagles did. Obviously, it's incredible. But if we're going to look at that, I mean, the Eagles that year let up 244. The Redskins let up 224. So if points matter, then the Redskins technically were better. Obviously, they're not the better defense of all time. I'm not saying that. But I'm just saying if we're going to look at points, then the Redskins are a little more impressive, no?
Well, the Redskins had the best offensive line, and they ran a ball control offense. So they would eat up the clock, eat up the clock, eat up the clock. The Eagles' defense was literally seemed like they're on the field the whole time because the offense would go 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out. I mean, so yeah, the statistics work out that way, but in reality of the game, the Redskins were controlling the clock. That's just really it.
We need some like points per drive stats and like yards per drive stats. Unfortunately, we don't see anything from back then. But like again, like going back to his point about the offense. I mean, the offense went 3 and out, 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 3 and out. I mean, it was worse than Chip Kelly with the 3 and outs. So you have a defense that's constantly on the field. Let me read off actually what like Football Outsiders said. Let me see if I can find that because they talked about that. But I'll just read off their whole bit. Okay. So looking at raw points scored and allowed can sometimes disguise the true strength of a defense because of the problems on the other side of the ball. No team in modern NFL history exemplifies this quite like the 1991 Eagles. After Randall Cunningham tore an ACL 15 minutes into the first game of the season, the Eagles' offense collapsed. The defense spent the season constantly defending short fields. So while the Eagles gave up just 3.92 yards per play, the third best figure since the move to a 16-game season in 1978, they finished 5th overall in points allowed in 1991. Opposing quarterbacks completed just 44.1% of passes, lowest rate of any defense since 1978. They led the NFL with 55 sacks, 43 forced fumbles, finished 3rd with 26 interceptions, and the defense wasn't one-dimensional. The Eagles allowed just 2.97 yards per carry, which ranks 5th since 1978. They put up these obscene numbers in standard stats despite playing the 4th toughest defensive schedule in the league. Their division rivals finished 1st, Washington, 4th, Dallas, and 6th, New York, in offensive DVOA. This was the late Buddy Ryan's defense, but without Ryan. Okay, so I don't really need to go after that, but you see the beginning there and that bit. So they basically make the point for me. I don't have to say anything.
Yeah, I mean, that's completely fair. Obviously, when you run a ball control offensive style, your defense is probably going to play, I'd probably say 15 to 20 less snaps than the opposition's defense. So obviously, just margin of error is much smaller, for a team who's always on the field. That's fair. But it's not like the Ravens were lighting up scoreboards either, So, I mean, again, offensively, yeah, they were a pretty good team, but I think this preconceived notion that they were a successful running team is kind of under the radar because they really weren't that awesome rushing the ball.
You got to remember, we're nitpicking here because we're arguing against two. Like that Eagles offense was that bad. It was that bad. So, it might have been a little worse than the Ravens, but I do think it was worse. But again, it's like apples and oranges, right?
For sure. I mean, we're comparing again generations, so it really doesn't translate, really exceptionally well.
Yeah. So, all right, Philly.500. You got any other arguments to make?
No, I think everything is pretty much said. I mean, I will say that when you challenge Baltimore Ravens defense with the Eagles, that's a hard one. Now, if you would have given me like Denver Broncos of 2015 or 2013 Seattle Seahawks, I think it'd be a lot easier to make. But that Baltimore defense was, I would say, my top 3 all-time I've seen. I would say the 85 Bears, the 91 Eagles, and that Ravens defense. Because they were dominating and they were intimidating, and you don't see that today. And there's something about that made football great, So I do look favorable on that Ravens team. I do. I have no, I like that Ravens team. I rooted for them. It was great to see them beat the crap out of the Giants, and they're one of the best for sure. I can't say they're not.
Yeah. All right, I guess before I got, I did run down the quarterbacks that the Eagles face. And some of the ones, I mean, we had Troy Aikman, obviously. We had Chris Chandler, Bobby Hebert of the Saints, if anybody remembers him. Steve Young they played, Boomer Esiason, Warren Moon, Vinny Testaverde, Bernie Kosar. So the quarterbacks that they played were better than the ones the Ravens played. But when in terms of the running backs, obviously the Ravens definitely played some better ones. Even though Emmitt Smith, I mean, for the Eagles, it's it's not like the Eagles didn't play anybody either.
You know what's crazy to think about? The Ravens also played Vinny Testaverde. Shout out to Vinny Testaverde, man. Big Vinny.
They did play Vinny Testaverde. Let's see. That was I did write some of the good quarterbacks they played. They did play Vinny Testaverde, Cordell Stewart, they good that year, McNair, and they did play Aikman too. But Aikman was on the downside of his career.
For sure.
So. Now was Ryan was one of the Ryans one of the defensive coaches at that time?
Yeah, actually, he was Marvin Lewis was the defensive coordinator. I think Jack Del Rio was their linebackers coach.
Wow.
I think Rex was the D-line coach, and someone was their DB's coach. He also, I think it was Les Frazier. I think he was there. 2000. Let me give a quick Google here.
Yeah.
Their defensive staff.
Well, that makes sense because you add Ryan. It kind of makes sense why they had a similar kind of mindset.
Rex Ryan, defensive line coach. So here you go. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, they're one of the few staffs who you can look up and down and say there's probably 5 head coaches on that team.
It's kind of like when you look at the 2002 Eagles, and see all the coaches that came from that team too. The Andy Reid coaching tree.
And our future head coach, Harbaugh.
Yeah.
He'll be our future head coach.
Hey, I mean, here's the thing: we don't see in 2000 coaches don't coach somewhere for more than 10 years.
Yeah,
it's just gonna happen. I love him, but he's gonna either get fired one year or move on. It's just what happens. You don't.
Philly.500 scoping him. He's scouting him. I'm scouting him. I want him.
He is the man. I mean, look, his brother's awesome too. He's awesome. Married into coaching. I mean, yeah. I mean, like he'd be a steal for the Eagles. Personally, I actually wanted Rex to be the Ravens head coach initially. I was like, who the heck is this special teams dude? And then, well, he worked out to be okay. Super Bowl later, he's earned my good graces.
Yeah, you guys got 2 of those damn rings, fuckers. Yeah. All right, we'll do final thoughts right now. I got nothing else. I got my notes. I went through all of it. I guess if you want to know who some of the guys were on the Ravens defense, we got Ray Lewis, Rod Woodson, Jamie Sharper, Tony Saragusa, Chris McAllister, Rob Burnett, Peter Bulaware, Michael McCrary, Dwayne Stark, Sam Adams. So that's quite the defense right there. So there you go. Anybody else got anything to say?
I'll say this. If you're young, and you have a chance, go back, watch those old Eagles defenses, watch those games because it's very cool to be able to go see what guys in the past were like. We didn't have a chance to do that growing up. Now you do, and I definitely think you should take advantage of that.
Brennan, got anything? Any final words?
Yeah, 500. That's a great point. I mean, you want to watch really defenses as a unit play. Both of these teams are great. The Bucks have it. The Seahawks had it. Those are just awesome things for youth to go and watch it. It's really, really important. Take advantage of the resources you get. But the thing I'm just going to say is all the Ravens' success comes back to Ozzie Newsome. His first 2 draft picks ever, Jonathan Ogden, Hall of Famer. Second one, Ray Lewis. Okay, he did pretty good with his 2 picks, and that's why the Ravens were successful as they are, and that's why their image is always going to be a defensive-minded. But either way, guys, love the debate today. I still think I'm number 1. I know everyone in the comment section is going to say I'm everything in between, something kind, and a lot of nasty things, but can't hate. 91 defense was unbelievable for the Birds.
Yeah, well, actually, our commenters like you, so but they may not like you anymore.
We'll find out.
You think you're smart, but now that they know that you're a Ravens fan, they may not want you back on the show. So,
oh yeah,
you're a bitter bird for another reason.
That's right.
All right, yeah. So just to figure back 100 minutes, try and watch some of the old games if you can. I mean, they are available on YouTube. There's a guy by the name of Stephen Harris, I believe, Eagles fan Harris, whatever his name is. He's got a lot of classic old games. There's a guy named Jay Philly that you can type in on YouTube. There's a lot of guys that have uploaded Eagles games. You can go back and watch them. If you're familiar with torrents, download uTorrent and download some of that shit on whatever. Actually, I don't know if you'll be able to get a 10-yard torrents invite, but that's a site that I go to download games. So try and watch the games, man. Like try, like Philly.500 was saying with Brandon Graham, and well, one of the reasons why he's not such a fan. I mean, he's seen that 91 defense. He's seen it in the fold. He knows how good that defensive line can be. So when he sees a guy like Brandon Graham, well, it doesn't really impress him too much. So like you want to make that point, Philly?
Yeah, well, there's you have Reggie White and Clyde Simmons. It's big shoes to fill. So, I mean, I
still think Brandon Graham's pretty good though.
I'm just giving him a hard time. I'm not really attacking Brandon Graham. I'm just joking, just fire, just starting it. I don't mean it. I love Brandon Graham. He's great. I know they get mad. I'm just joking.
All right, I think we're done. Brendan, you got anything else? I think we're good, right?
That's it, guys. Keep track of us. Me and AJ are going to start doing some NFL previews. Looking forward to doing that with y'all.
Yeah, hell yeah. So we're going to be starting that next Sunday. We're previewing all 32 teams. We're going through the whole, all of them. So can't wait for that. I'm going to have my rankings going to be coming out. The Bitterbirds are going to be doing it big all summer, getting you ready for the 2017 NFL season. But until then, enjoy your holidays. Enjoy your July 4th. I will definitely be enjoying it. Philly.500. Brendan Albert, I'm Adrian Fedku. We're all across the United States, New Jersey, Las Vegas, and California. We're out.